When I went to federal prison in 2008, I was very naive. In other words, I presumed if you were in prison, you did it. I didn't understand the nuances of white collar crime. And now that our team, through White Collar Advice and prison professors, have been preparing defendants through sentencing, prison, all of the myriad collateral consequences that accompany white collar crime, now that we've been in this game for a while, I understand the nuanced truth of white collar crime. And I also understand how these nuances can absolutely influence a sentencing hearing. I'll touch on that in this video. And I will also cover, in my experience, in my opinion, the most interesting white collar crime ever, the most fascinating white collar crime, because there are so many. As I go to mute here, so I'm not disturbed here for an hour. Forgive me, I'm only going to speak for about 15 minutes. I'm going to cover what I believe to be the most fascinating white collar crime and why. So when I got to federal prison, as I mentioned, I was naive. I did a lot of listening. So for those of you who say I talk too much, good news for all of you. When I was in federal prison, excuse me, those of you who say I talk too much, I ramble. When I was in federal prison, I did a very little talkie, a lot of little listening, because I was fascinated walking around that dusty dirt track, listening and learning from people why they were in prison. The most interesting case, not the most fascinating, interesting case was people who literally did not know they were breaking the law, had no idea that they were breaking the law. An example of that could include a physician, a doctor who thinks he's paying a marketer to bring in patients into his clinic. And as a payment to bringing in these patients, he pays the marketer. The Department of Justice comes in, alleges, and says, hey, doc, these are kickbacks. So I served time in prison with doctors who were like, I never went to business school. I hadn't been to college in 30, 40 years. Someone came in, said they could bring me patients. I need patients to grow my business and to sustain myself. I paid him. I had no idea that it was a kickback. Indeed, so many of the people with whom we've worked at White Collar Advice who have gone to trial and unfortunately lose, because it is very difficult to prevail when it's your name versus the United States of America, will continue to maintain their innocence when they say, I had no idea that I was engaging in kickbacks and I had no idea that I was breaking the law. Many of those people will then learn and say, yeah, this was a mistake. I shouldn't have done it. At the time, I didn't know. Now I know. I'm going to plead guilty and accept responsibility. It's interesting, though it is not the most fascinating, which I'm going to get into in a few minutes. Another type of white collar crime. There are dudes right now breaking the law who know they're breaking the law. And while they're breaking the law, and I know because we've had people in our community tell us this, they will actually calculate the sentencing guidelines before breaking the law. It sounds crazy because the lion's share of white collar defendants have never been immersed in the criminal justice system. They never think they're going to get involved in the criminal justice system. Many of them get trapped. They get immersed in it. They don't know how to respond. They double down and make things worse. Some cases that should be probation or home confinement or a year and a day turn out to be 4 years. I'm one of those people. So we just don't know how to respond. But there are some people who knowingly commit the crime and calculate, hey, if I get caught and there's a chance here, based on the sentencing guidelines of 15 points, I'm going to serve 27 to 33 months in prison. One of my first clients out of federal prison said for like 2 decades, he had engaged in schemes and frauds and estimated what the potential sanction could be. And the funny thing, he said, not funny to me nor his victims, but it was sort of funny the way he delivered. He's like, the irony is the thing I got caught for was the one I figured I wouldn't get caught for. Thankfully, it has the least onerous sanction. So that's interesting, though not the most fascinating. What I consider to be the least interesting, frankly, is someone like who goes to trial and maintains their innocence, which of course you have the right to do, but many people go to trial, most lose. You think of Elizabeth Holmes or Balwani. They went to trial, they lost, they're going to appeal. They're walking around that dusty track in prison saying, like, I didn't do anything wrong. Kind of interesting, but not that interesting. Certainly served time with a lot of people in prison under that scenario going to trial and lose. I would argue willful blindness is fairly interesting. Initially, the government argued that I was guilty of willful blindness, where you like deliberately ignore or turn a blind eye to illegal or unethical conduct. And the government would argue, as I wrote here in this blog, you are indirectly perpetuating the crime by choosing not to acknowledge or address such actions. That's a big part of what I did. In my case, I learned that my client, a hedge fund manager, was lying to his investors to raise money. And he was paying my company, or Bear Stearns, and then UBS $100,000 a month in production. He was raising money and losing money, raising money and losing money. Clearly, our intellect and experience as stockbrokers told us he's only raising money by lying to people, yet we were turning the other way. We heard nothing. We didn't say anything because we didn't want the gravy train of commissions to end. So a myriad people go to prison for willful blindness, and a number of those people tend to make problems worse once they get into trouble because they truly don't believe that they did anything wrong. It's like, I didn't run the fraud like he did. It's his fault, not mine. Interesting, though not the most fascinating, which is what I'm going to get into right now, the most fascinating white collar crime, in my opinion. Has anyone followed the case of Charlie Javice, who had a financial planning company for college students, and she sold this business to JP Morgan for $175 million? Anyone followed it? I'm talking to myself here on this live video. It's so fascinating because when you're going to sell a business to JP Morgan Chase or anywhere, they are going to do due diligence and vetting. And while JP Morgan and Jamie, the CEO, would argue they got duped and they should have done more due diligence, what's so incredibly fascinating about Charlie Javice is she knowingly engaged in this crime to say that they had more than 4 million users as part of this financial planning company, when in reality, they only had 300,000. So they tell she says, JP Morgan, I got 4 million users, give me 175 million, when in reality, there's only 300,000. And there's internal messages of her telling her staff via Slack to inflate the numbers to make them look good so the sale can go through. And indeed it did. What I find so incredibly fascinating about this white collar crime is she knew if she pleads guilty or is convicted at trial, she knew that she was lying to JP Morgan. She knew that she was saying that there's 4 million active users when there's only 300,000. She knew all of this allegedly was a ruse and a fraud. But here's what's the most fascinating about it. She presumed she would never get caught. That's what's so fascinating. Those are the most interesting characters, and many of the people with whom we serve time who are my friends, they do it. They know that it's wrong. Unlike the doctor who had no idea that taking kickback was a problem. Even the willful blindness, where it's like, I didn't know, I kind of turned the other way, I didn't manage it, I wasn't responsible, it's not really me, why am I being held accountable? Like, they did it, I turned the other way. Nuanced. The person that goes to trial, not that intentional, right? They maintain their innocence. They're going to appeal, not that interest. Even the guy who's the risk taker, who knows I'm doing it and knows that I may get caught, kind of interesting. Nothing more fascinating to yours truly than someone who absolutely breaks the law. They know they're breaking the law. They know that it could be so obvious in front of people like JP Morgan, who has shareholders and is publicly traded, and they're going to scratch a check for $175 million and then think, yeah, they're just never going to find out that I only have 300,000 active users instead of 4 million. No problem. It is so fascinating because there's something that has convinced them that they can do this. Now, there's many things you could argue that enables or compels someone to think they're not going to get caught. They just think it's too small, or it's not that big a deal, or they're just going to get away with it, or they're not going to pursue it. Indeed, I hear that I'm a small fish. It's not that big a deal. It's a rounding error. If anything happens, maybe it will be handled civilly. This isn't criminal. They could have enablers around them who tell them this is a fantastic idea, people who may get paid, maybe shareholders who don't want to lose their investment, whatever. Most of those people tend not to know the truth anyway, in my experience. It's so fascinating that she could take in $175 million by a huge bank under the idea that she had 4 million users in this financial planning company. Went through due diligence, they only had 300,000. Of course, fraud charges are coming. Of course, an indictment is coming. And if true, and if she pleads guilty, which is most likely considering other people will be cooperating against her, the federal prison sentence can be very lengthy because you have the guidelines and the money spent. We're talking about $175 million here. So let me close with what all of you need to do if the goal is mitigation. It's tragic when someone who should get a more nuanced or better federal prison sentence doesn't get the outcome because they don't know how to mitigate. They don't know how to respond. What I mean is there might be physicians who take that kickback, who don't know that it's wrong, who respond poorly to the investigation. And as a result of that poor response, gets a longer sentence than someone who like knowingly committed a crime, knew if they get caught what the guidelines can be, but because they mitigate so beautifully, they get a shorter sentence despite having criminal intentions the whole time compared to the doctor who did not have bad intentions, and they get, swept into it. It's not necessarily fair, but this ain't a fair system, man. This is a wretched system. When we send people to prison for far too long, we have someone in our community going to federal prison for 18 months in a hacking scheme. It happened like 7 years ago, and the investigation took 5 years, and he was expecting home confinement, and the judge is like, I'm going to make an example out of you and sentence you to prison for 18 months. It happened 7 years ago. Is there really a need to send him to federal prison? Once you are involved in this sickening system, it is hard to emerge unscathed, which means you need to mitigate. Because what I don't want you to get a sentence that is longer than it should be. But if you don't mitigate and tell your story, guess what? It's coming. Let me close this video, live video. You can read the whole blog at White Collar Advice, with some things you need to do, presuming your goal is the shortest sentence in the most favorable institution. Number one, if you get involved in this system, research to understand all the elements of the offense, enabling you to strategize your defense better. Like, do you understand the sentencing guidelines? Do you understand the points? Do you understand the government's perception of you? Do you even understand what wire fraud means? Earlier this morning, I spoke with some clients at Mississippi State, and I said, do you know what wire fraud is? Do you know what security fraud is? Do you know that? They don't know. People do it every single day. They have no idea what the hell it is. So I need you to understand the elements of your offense. For example, one of my first clients a long time ago is a chiropractor in Arizona, and he was about to sign a plea agreement that he didn't know. It's identity theft, but it was only like $40,000. I'm like, hold on, my man. Do you know identity theft comes with a 2-year mandatory minimum? And while I'm not a lawyer and I don't offer legal advice, it was helpful for him to know if he signed it, it was going to be a 2-year mandatory minimum, which is identity theft, compared to wire fraud, which has a 20-year cap. But with like a $40,000 loss that he paid off, it could have been 3 months or home confinement or something very short. Understand the consequences of the offense. 2, understand the vast resources the prosecutors have at their disposal. In my office behind me, I have a lot of the media over the years from CNN and Fox and elsewhere. And Allison Camerata, years ago when I went live on CNN, said, Justin, you're helping all these rich, white, privileged people. She didn't say the white privilege, but I knew what she was thinking. You're helping all these privileged people buy their way out of federal prison. And I found it so ironic that she could argue that we're helping people buy their way out of federal prison while forgetting the government has endless resources, our tax dollars. If you had $1 billion, it don't compete with the resources of the government. It does not. So you need to understand the resources they have, the time they're putting into the case, speaking with your potential co-defendants. They know likely to lose because this prosecutor wants to become a U.S. attorney. This prosecutor, a U.S. attorney, wants to become a defense attorney that so many of you are enamored by because you tend to hire them, because usually when people call us, the first thing they'll say is, my lawyer is a former U.S. attorney. So I want them to be a great lawyer, but you've got to understand the prosecutor wants to advance their career and they have endless resources to prosecute. Put yourself in their shoes. Only then can you create a story or a strategy that is plausible and realistic. And if that story is, I didn't have bad intention, here's how. I began my career with good intentions, here's how I went rogue. Once I learned of the investigation, here's how I'm taking corrective measure. That's measurably better than Charlie Javice, who is, I broke the law, I continue to make bad decisions, and I just figured nobody would find out. So fascinating, but true. Of course they're going to find out. You stole $175 million from a bank, allegedly. Number 3, recognizing the potential tools and evidence they can utilize against you is crucial in preparing a solid defense. I just sort of touched on that, right? They have potential co-defendants, they have endless resources, they have FBI agents who are working full-time to build this case. They're going to look at other things you have said and done to get an idea of your character. So you need to put yourself in their shoes and say, what evidence do they have? How am I combating it? It starts with telling your story properly, understanding the motivations behind your crime, allegedly, the crime itself, and then creating a plausible story of recalibrating, working. If there's money, paying back victims, building a new career. If you have an opportunity to work openly with the government, do so. In other words, pay attention to your post-defense conduct, because what gets so many people into trouble is their post-defense conduct. Like yours truly, I lied to the feds. It wasn't perjury. I wasn't under oath, but it was obstruction of justice. And I later learned when I spoke at the FBI Academy in March of 2011, had I not lied when the government interviewed me, there's a good chance they wouldn't have referred me to David Willingham, the U.S. attorney at the time, for prosecution. Everything you do matters. They're watching. Even Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, tried to get off probation early. Despite being a cooperating witness, the government told the judge, do not let him off probation early, because he wrote things in his book that kind of take away his acceptance of responsibility. They're always watching. You can use that to your advantage or to your detriment. The choice is yours. Assess your available financial and other resources is essential to a proactive defense. So a few more minutes here. So I get a call from someone a few months ago that says, I'm going to trial. I want to go to trial. Then a week later, he's like, I can't go to trial. I'm going to lose. I'll never win. I'm guilty. I'm like, well, why don't you negotiate a plea deal? I'm not a lawyer, but it might make sense. And he said, well, my lawyer wants to go through discovery. I said, well, how much is that going to cost you? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, what does your lawyer charge? $800 an hour. Okay. How much have you burnt through? $100,000. He wants another $100,000. Okay, so he's going to go through discovery for the next 3 months. And what's going to happen over the next 3 months while he goes through another $100,000 at $800 an hour? Well, he says, well, what do you mean? Well, what's going to happen? I think I get what you're throwing my way, Justin. I think he's going to discover that I broke the law. I said, probably. Does it make sense to throw that money down the drain? Because I know you already feel like you are in prison. You think about it 24 hours a day. You haven't left your home. You're living in a dungeon. You can't function. You can't eat. You can't have sex. You can't do anything. You already feel like you're in jail. Now you want to delay it another 3 months? How about you contemplate accepting responsibility, telling your story, articulating to the government you want to try to make things right, get your file off their desk. And he said, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. I'm going to do that. And he did. And guess what? He's going to have a much more favorable outcome. So you need to understand the financial resources you have, how quickly they can get depleted, because this ain't cheap. And then you can make a more informed decision. 2 more here before we wrap up this live video. Number 6, a comprehensive understanding of the sentencing guidelines in your case. It's stunning how many people don't understand the guidelines. I get a call from someone. They're like, just got my probation report back. I was expecting 6 months home confinement or a year and a day. They're asking for 9 years. Can you help me understand that? And I go through the probation report, and it's like the points, the loss, the sophistication. I'm like, do you understand the guidelines? And they'll say, well, they're only guidelines. The judges aren't bound by them. But yes, per the Sentencing Commission, judges are asked, they're told, pay strong attention to the guidelines. So to think that a judge isn't going to use the guidelines is a starting point. It's like believing a tobacco company don't want you to be smoking cigarettes or doing vape. It's just stupid. Every now and again, a federal judge like Judge Boulware said at a conference I attended, I don't even use the guidelines. They're useless to me. And Judge Gonzalez Rogers, a federal judge in Northern California, looked at him with a look of like, wow, I totally look at the guidelines to start. If you don't understand the guidelines, then you are not ready to traverse this wretched criminal justice system. And last but not least, number 7, knowing the potential range of penalties and the factors that can mitigate or aggravate your sentence. If you can do that, it allows for informed decision-making during the plea negotiations or trials. This sounds like an info commercial for my business or company, but whether we help you or not, the earlier you can begin to prepare, the better. I was out with my daughter yesterday on Father's Day, and I got a call from a defendant that said, can we speak? We spoke this morning. He's like, my lawyer told me it's too early to prepare, but I know that's not true because I heard a video you said where it's like, it's not too early for the DOJ to arrest me at 6 a.m., for them to do a press release, for my bank to fire me. It wasn't too early for me to give $250,000 to a lawyer. It wasn't too early for my friends to begin avoiding me and ostracizing me. Of course, it's not too early. If they show up at your home and you learn that you're the target of an investigation, you're already in the bottom of the 8th inning, man. So the question is, what do you do to mitigate? What do you do to take action? You can wait. You can stall and delay, though I would ask you to assess people in your life that wait, stall, and delay. Are they successful? Do they get closer to what they want? So whether you schedule a call with our team and we help you tell your story effectively by putting yourself in the shoes of the stakeholders, the judge, the prosecutor, the probation officer, and crafting a plausible narrative that first you give to your lawyer so they fully understand who you are, so then they can negotiate more favorably on your behalf. But if you aren't doing the lion's share of the work, you're not ready. If you're not working every day to demonstrate why you're worthy of leniency, you're not ready. If you're not working full-time every day to demonstrate what you've learned, why you'll never return to another courtroom, how you're working as a law-abiding citizen, you are, as my business partner, Michael Santos, likes to say. Michael's doing training in the federal prisons today, which is awesome, by the way. Many of our programs are now First Step Act-approved programs in the BOP. Super awesome. But if you are not doing that work, you are, as Michael Santos liked to say to me in federal prison when I was wasting time, he would say, JP, my man, you are full of happy talk. You say it, you don't do it. You're good at the cliches, you're good at the platitudes, but own it. Own it. You're not doing the work. And some days I wasn't doing the work. And now I'm trying to do the work. I've been trying to do the work for a long, long time. So that's how I will close this video. I think Charlie Javice's crime is the most fascinating white-collar crime because she did it allegedly. She understood what was happening, the lies and ruses that were taking place, and just figured, ain't nobody going to find out. Wow. Very, very interesting. If you're in trouble, mitigate. Thank you so much for watching this video. You all are awesome. And I'm enjoying doing these live videos. One take, one chance, good or bad. It's the best I got. I'll do another one next week. Goodbye. I'm trying to find the end stream button. I can't find it. I got too many computers open, man. Okay, end stream. Goodbye.